What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? On today's episode, we are talking first-round draft picks, possible first-round draft picks and prospects to watch in the Steelers draft process. Alright, as I said in the intro to the show, we are talking these first-round draft picks. And these are guys that are prospected, through the first round. They're in guys like Daniel Jeremiah's top 50. We're going to talk 13 players. We're going to talk some on offense, some on defense. On today's episode, we're going to talk why I've put together those prospects as part of my top 75, top 100 that I will chop and change as we go throughout the draft process. But these guys are going to be locks on day one or day two through that process unless something crazy happens between now and then. And we're going to go into some of those players in specific videos, but I want to talk about this general cohort for starters because we do have the NFL Combine kicking off on the 27th of February. This will go out in the US on your 23rd, possibly 24th, probably 23rd of February. So it's 4 or 5 days. There's lots of videos about there's this guy, there's that guy. These are the top prospects to watch. I've narrowed this down to possible Steelers level prospects from a first round perspective. All right, let's get into it. So we're going to talk about the offensive guys first. That's the best place to start. Makes it easy. Now, the first thing in front of you when you look at this list, there's a white color. He'll be there on the defensive side too is Travis Hunter. Now, I'm going to call it straight out. Do I think the Steelers are going to be drafting Travis Hunter? No, I do not. Right? I do not. But that doesn't mean he's not a prospect. That doesn't mean that you're thinking about the way that he could be part of the Steelers in terms of what they're looking for in the draft process. Now, I said that they're not going to draft him. One of the reasons I'm interested in Travis Hunter, and there's a takeaway for Steelers fans this year, is that we could see this more in the future. We could see guys that can play both ways. I was looking at an interior offensive line prospect that played both ways in high school, and it is actually part of his draft profile, the fact that he can and has played both ways right up until college. He's not unique in that particular player, neither is Travis Hunter. There are people that have played both sides. But the usage of Travis Hunter is an interesting concept because I think as we go down the line over the next few years, we're going to see more of this. College coaches are going to be more open to doing it. We're going to see players less afraid of people, of being put in these roles as well. So I'm really excited by hearing how the Steelers potentially reference a Travis Hunter type or look at players with this flexibility. Now, as for the prospects, Ashton Jeanty, we're gonna have a video out on him through the week. You probably won't see too much of him at the Combine unless he thinks he's going to run a quick 40 time. If he can break that 4.4 mark, well, nuts from him. But we are going to do a video on him because he's getting a lot of talk right now. There's a lot of people that don't want us to go back. A lot of fans out there don't want to still go back to a running back in the first round. But you get a playmaker like that on a 5-year deal. Could be huge. Arthur Motes said something similar the other day. Matty Golden is someone that I'd actually mocked to the Steelers myself, and it's been hard for me to do videos the last sort of 4 or 5 months, but I'd mocked him a long time back. We're going to have a video out on him because there's some interesting things, and I'm repping a Longhorn shirt. That's my college football team that I support. Matty Golden's a really interesting prospect. Emeka Egbuka, we thought that there was a lot of hype that he would not even be there at 21. That could still be the case. But if Golden goes early, he could be. Josh Simmons is an interesting tackle prospect, so I think that as the draft process goes on, his youth, he could be someone the Steelers look at if the guy falls. Now, I actually think he'll go top 12, but I also think the Steelers should look at left tackle in free agency, not bringing back Dan Moore, but I have a look at left tackle depending on what they really want to do with Troy Fatanu. We'll talk about that on a later episode coming later in the week, or perhaps next weekend. But I've already started putting the stuff together for that. And then you've got Luther Burden III, who could be anywhere in the first, second round. I'm a big fan of Jaden Higgins out of Iowa as well. So this is kind of interesting with Luther Burden III, 6'2", like 210 plus pounds. I think he's like 220 almost. Out of Missouri. So he's an interesting prospect. I think that through the combine process in his pro day, he'll work himself into the first round. Okay, so then we look at the defensive side of the football. And I've actually made a change here in the last day out, like as I was putting my final thoughts on this together, I actually made a big change, and he's going to be a key player here. Some people that know their draft prospects, that know Michigan, are going to be surprised I don't have him here. Obviously, Travis Hunter up there. We've talked about the Travis Hunter part. Will Johnson's there as a cornerback. I don't think he's going to be there. I actually like Yedei Barron. And there's going to be some pronunciation. We're going to work out how it exactly is, but with my accent, that's how it comes across. But he's an awesome player. Probably more of a nickel slot guy in the NFL, but that is a key position. Daniel Jeremiah was talking about this with Rhett Lewis. You look at what Cooper DeJean did. You look at what Branch has done, both with their two teams and on the NFC side of things. You look at what McDuffie does when he plays there for the Chiefs. We've got what Hamilton does for the Ravens. There's heaps of teams that have got these really good corners in the slot. He's a great guy, big hits, playmaker. I'm a big fan of Barron. Have been all year with the Longhorns. Well, and the last few years he's been with them. Really important player. If he fell to 21, you'd be licking your chops at that. If he was there at 17 and you could move up, you might think about doing that too. He's a great player. And what he could do for this Steelers cornerback room is huge, because then, particularly if they go out and get someone, a decent free agent and happy to spend 12 plus million on that in the free agency period, and we'll talk about the salary cap in a later show this week as well, and the money that Steelers can make. We're going to have a bit of a play with the salary cap tool that I have access to. If you go get that cornerback there, and then you've got Barron, between Barron and Porter, you set yourself up and that free agent for the next 3 or 4 years, and you're locked down there. That's huge too, and you get cheaper at an expensive position. So really like that. Really would love the possibility of getting Barron. Now, a lot of people have Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, they've either got either or for 1 and 2 in terms of defensive tackles in this draft. I actually took that out. I took out the defensive tackle, and we'll talk about that in today's show. I was going to do a separate show on that, but we'll talk about the prospects separately, but I'm going to talk about them as a cohort in the second half, after this, basically, after we talk through all the defensive players. But I did take out Kenneth Grant, and I'll tell you why. I've moved up Alfred Collins. I think he's the back of the end of the first round kind of player. I'm a big fan of him out of the Texas Longhorns, obviously. Really like him. And he's number 50 right now on DJ's top 50 list, which is about to get a second iteration come out. I think Alfred Collins will move up in that as the process goes on. Then you got Derek Harmon, defensive tackle out of Oregon. Now, you could interchange him for Kenneth Grant, but at 20 years old, I presume Beaver's got their data right, that's a huge thing. And to stick him with Cameron Hayward and Benton there and learning off those guys and Carl Dunbar, you can just mold and shape that kid. And I just think to get a 20-year-old at 21, at 21st pick in the draft, for a top team like Oregon with his kind of stats, you're loving that. Now, I do have a safety here at Nick Emanwari. He's an interesting player, a really big safety. I do not think the Steelers will go and pick a safety at 21. I'm not even suggesting it. But if they were to trade back and they got a good offer in a haul, this guy's a big-bodied safety. We all know we've got Elliott, but you can move Elliott you can play him around the slot as well. Who knows where they're going to go with Minka. I think they're going to do... I'll save what I think they're going to do with Minka for my salary cap show this week. But look, Nick, you wouldn't get this player... he's going to be a lot better than Terrell Edmonds, and people will come to love him. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm just saying it's a prospect that fits a need that I still think exists on the Steelers defense. And then you got Walter Nolan, played at Ole Miss, formerly at Texas A&M. He's a guy. These aren't ordered as well. I should have said that for offense as well. This isn't ordered in terms of where I think they'll fall in the draft. A little bit ordered for a couple of spots, but not fully ordered. Walter Nolan's probably up there before Alfred Collins in terms of who gets picked. But I like him, and I hope I want to see him through the draft process continue to prove his worth. But definitely a guy that on the stat sheet, on the projection side of things, on the prospect numbers, he's worthy of a day one pick for sure, and I do like him. I think he can do more than some of the other guys that are projected in the first round. Okay, so I said we talk about the defensive linemen, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to shift gears. Now this is defensive linemen. Now PFF grades, I know some people don't love them. but at least it gives us something to talk about. It's equal to everyone. I basically pulled up all the guys that the interior defensive line position based on their draft year, and then we'll move from there. Now, I didn't do the minimum snaps thing. I can easily do that, but I chose not to. Actually, you know what? We'll go minimum snaps of 50% of the top, which was 776. So we'll do it like that. So that's a bit fair. Now, Darius Alexander out of Toledo is rocketing up boards. He could find himself a day one pick as well, and take over anyone at the back end. But you look at this list, and what do you notice so far is that Kenneth Grant, who is either 1 or 2 on most people's boards at the defensive tackle position, is down here in number 9 for his grade. That's his grade, so what? But he's only got 3 sacks, and that puts him quite far behind a lot of the other top guys that are being projected into the first round. Now, there's guys that played for smaller colleges, as you can see, that have like 8 and 7 sacks and all the rest of it. But if we go back to the overall defensive grade side of things, Mason Graham, 5 sacks, Darius Alexander, 4 sacks, Walter Nolan, 6 sacks, Alfred Collins only had 1, but he has a... He's got some other like key stats, and he's more of like the really interior guy for Texas. And then you look at Broughton as well, who could be he's a great prospect. And then you go down to Harmon, he's got 5 sacks. So obviously, like, not everyone on the team can have sacks, and the fact that Kenneth Grant's there obviously makes it helpful for Mason Graham. You can make that argument. But I also like the Alfred Collins and Walter Nolan piece, because I really think those guys, from an interior perspective, it's really important for what the Steelers need to do. I think they need to kick Benton out, and so they need a guy that they can move in. That's a really key aspect for me in what the Steelers do in this year's draft process. I can't say that enough of where I think that needs to go in terms of the Steelers being able to get this defensive line, back and moving, and just I just want to see it do a little bit better. Now, if we go to... Actually, no, we'll cover that on a different show. But yeah, just going back to some of these projections. So when I talk about Kenneth Grant, I don't think the production there necessarily warrants him being the top defensive tackle in this draft. And I think when all things are said and done, that will actually come into play quite a bit. The other thing that I think when I look at like an Alfred Collins is like the bats and the hurries, and the hits as well. Like, he doesn't have a hit there, and that's an interesting piece for Alfred Collins. He's got less tackles, but people didn't run into that Texas line with the run game. They were trying to rush to the outside because of the interior pressure, and so. But when you go 6 batted balls, and we think about what the Steelers do with Cameron Hayward, like that's a big contribution to creating things like interceptions, creating things to fumbles, to shutting down teams. It's a huge thing. So, when I've got Alfred Collins here, and people might want to question that, he's a player that can do a heck of a lot, for a team. So I think it's going to be interesting from my perspective to see how it's received from him, in terms of like the performance that he's given in really big games, leading a Texas interior defensive line. But I think the big piece for me that is, as I've said, is the difference in how I'm viewing things is very much that I don't see Kenneth Grant as one of the top 2 to 3 defensive linemen, at least from the statistical perspective. I know his play on tape is great and he shuts stuff down, but I think he's right now getting a pretty high look in when it comes to his draft status. The other thing I think that was interesting that I found with Walter Nolan is just that sheer amount of sacks. Just the sheer amount of sacks, the quarterback hits, it absolutely stood out to me in terms of what Walter Nolan has done at Ole Miss. He's a really interesting prospect as well in terms of going from a team like Texas A&M that have had some really good interior guys there. He's a guy that's finishing his college career with like 14 sacks. I saw 13 on Sports Reference, that's Pro Football Reference's site, but still 13 and a half, 14, whatever it is. That's huge. He had 2 batted balls as well, and I think Walter Nolan is really undersung as a prospect in that first round. I think a lot of people have him pegged as the last defensive lineman. I actually think he should be pegged a lot more higher on that list because I do think that his performances have been pretty good from that perspective. And then if it can load for me, we'll quickly get into Harmon as well, because I wanted to talk more about this prospect, this young bloke that I've talked about that, as I've said, is kind of an interesting prospect when you think about the age that he is. 6'5", 310 pound at his age, absolutely huge. He's a 4-year guy too. So yeah, just absolutely nuts. I think he turns 21 pretty soon though, so I don't think he's 20 much longer. But 9 sacks for him over the course of his college career, 9 hits, 72 hurries is absolutely huge. Absolutely huge. 67 tackles. Again, really is a big numbers for a young guy. Oregon's had a good team for a couple of years now as well, so I really like that. From him, and versatility in that defensive line as well. So it'll be interesting to see from his perspective. I think I want to pull up his snaps actually, because that's going to give us a good me to give you the right accuracy with what I wanted to say next about in the D line. Yeah, that's right. So we look at this. We can actually look at where he played his different snaps, and when you look across the D line. Okay, let me get this one right, because they're not going to total it up. Yeah, we need to. Yeah, you can look at it like this. This is probably the easiest way for me to do this while I'm doing it live with you guys. So he's mainly lined up on the left side, defensive line, on the left side, right? That's where he's basically like and rushing. So when you look at that. From that perspective, lining up against the left tackle, he's got a guy that's going to rush in, so they're probably not moving Benton if you're going and getting Harmon. So that's a big consideration you've got to make. But maybe you don't need to move Benton until Cam Hayward retires. That could be a decision that the Steelers look to make. But anyway, I just want to pick that interesting take on the defensive lineman, because it's such a defensive lineman rich draft this year, and that means that, like, obviously people can say, well, you can take one later, but the fact is that the Steelers need help on the defensive line. They should cut Ogunjobi. I've talked about that on a previous show. But secondly, they should get younger at the position. There's not always going to be a really deep defensive line draft. We've had that in previous years. It hasn't been as strong. So the Steelers should get one now, learn, maybe keep Cam Hayward. Like, Cam Hayward had a great year. Imagine if he doesn't have to play 5-10% of the snaps he played last year. Steelers going to be in a better position. But you let me know in the comments, what do you think about the offensive and defensive guys that I've talked about? As I said, we are going to have more content come on Matthew Golden and Asian Genti is the first part. I'm going to talk about a couple of other wide receivers as we go through process, particularly Higgins. I really like Higgins. But you let me know in the comments, is there someone here that I missed, someone that you're looking at? I didn't include quarterback because I don't think the class is that great. Really, like, you can go get Quinn Ewers in the 4th round if you really want to. I'm not really the biggest fan of that. I think he's Kenny Pickett 2.0. But they're not going to be in there for Cam Ward or Shadow Sanders. They shouldn't be trading up to get them. These aren't the quarterbacks. 2026 when the draft's in Pittsburgh, or 2027 when you've got Arch Manning. They're the drafts to go hell for leather on. Not Shadow Sanders and Cam Ward. Anyway, you let me know in the comments. I'm Matty P. As always, go Steelers.